So we are now less than 2 months away from the 2022 NBA All-Star Game, which is crazy to think that we're already more than a third of the way through the season, and the Bulls are sitting second in the East, only one game out of the top spot behind the Nets. And as I'm sure you guys know, earlier this week, fan voting for the NBA All-Stars has commenced. Now, for me personally, I generally prefer to wait until the final days of voting before I cast my official vote, as a lot of things can happen between now and then in the player's overall performance. And so I know some of you have been asking for a video on who I will be voting for the All-Star Game, and to make a video on that and who I selected and why, and I will do that, but I'll do it closer towards the end of the voting period. But what I want to talk about in today's video is who on this Bulls roster is the most likely to get an All-Star nod, what are their chances and factors to be considered that would get them an All-Star spot. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. So I do want to say, before I dive into some of the details and rationale for why certain guys should make the All-Star Game, that for me, I'm not a huge fan of the fan voting for the NBA All-Star Game. I do like that they recently changed the weighting structure to where the fans still get a vote in the selection of a player, but when you insert fan voting, it becomes more of a popularity contest than anything, or simply voting in players for your favorite team. Now, the good thing is the fan voting is only for the starting lineup, so ultimately if a player was snubbed by the fans and they are worthy enough to be an All-Star, that they'll get selected as a reserve. I also put more stock or credibility into all NBA selections rather than All-Star selections when it comes to a player's overall career resume. So just wanted to mention that because I do think some of the fan voting will impact some of the chances certain Bulls players have at getting selected. Now, as for the Bulls roster and who are the most likely candidates to be selected as All-Stars, well, it's really going to come down to 4 players who even have a claim to be All-Stars, and that's Zach Lavine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, who have all been All-Stars in the past, and Lonzo Ball, who would be a first-time All-Star if selected. Now, I'm going to start with the most obvious candidates who, in my opinion, there is no doubt in my mind that they will be selected, and it would be an outrage if they didn't, and that is Zach Lavine and DeMar DeRozan. Now, before the season had started, I had some prediction videos that I put out, as well as some responses to your Bulls hot takes, that I thought the Bulls would get 2 All-Stars selected this season, and that it would be DeRozan and Lavine, even though DeRozan hasn't made an All-Star game since he left Toronto. And even though Vucevic was selected as an All-Star last year, I thought that Vuce likely wasn't going to be putting up the kind of numbers he did in Orlando, especially on a team where he would likely be the third option on offense. And so far, that has turned out to be true. It also didn't help that Vucevic struggled and started off the season slow, but in any event, you've seen stellar performances from Lavine and DeRozan, and even though the spotlight on Lonzo Ball has also been taking a bit of shine away from Vucevic as a result, I think all of that factors into why Vucevic likely will not get an All-Star bid, but I'll talk about that more in a little bit. So I don't think that there's any scenario for which Lavine and DeRozan are not selected as All-Stars this season, and I think at least one of them, if not both, will be voted in as starters. Now, the thing that you have to understand when it comes to factors that are considered for a player's All-Star candidacy is that it's very much skewed towards a player's overall team performance. I'm not saying that's the only factor, and whether that's fair or not is a different debate, but that's generally how it is viewed. Yes, exceptions happen here and there for players who are performing incredibly well, but maybe their team isn't performing all that well. You saw that last season with Lavine getting selected, even though the Bulls were an average team. Bradley Beal was also selected as an All-Star, even though his team was okay. Like, yes, those instances happen, but for the most part, the teams with the best records and their top players on said teams get the most recognition and consideration to be All-Stars. The good thing for the Bulls is that, for once, they're one of the top teams in the league, and so guys are going to be recognized for that and are going to have a much easier time in becoming All-Stars as a result. Unlike last season where you had Zach kind of claw his way into the All-Star game when you thought he might not even make it, even though he was clearly performing at an All-Star level and putting up insane numbers. So let's start with DeMar DeRozan. Now, I think a lot of people assume that DeRozan's days of being an All-Star were over after having missed the All-Star game since 2018. Still a great player, a very productive player, and a big contributor, but just not an All-Star level player anymore. Well, since joining the Bulls, He has completely changed that narrative, and not only clearly being an all-star caliber level player, but you even have people putting him in the MVP conversation for how impactful he has been on this Bulls team. In fact, both DeRozan and Lavine have generally been climbing that MVP ladder, being in the top 10 in most weeks. I mentioned that in last night's post-game video, but part of the reason DeRozan has been so successful this season, aside from him just having a great supporting cast, but it's also the fact that the Bulls and their coaching staff have given him the green light to do what he does best in utilizing his mid-range game and not worrying about all the analytics that say the mid-range jumper is the most inefficient shot in basketball. Now, you look at DeRozan's numbers in conjunction with the Bulls being one of the best teams in basketball, and you see how much of a shoo-in he is in being an all-star relative to his competition. DeRozan is averaging 27 points per game, which is 5th in the entire league, up from 21 points per game last season, and he's doing it on insane efficiency, shooting 50.6% from the field. Get this, he's actually shooting a career best from 3 at 36.5% on near 2.5 attempts per game. He's shooting 88% from the free throw line on 7.7 attempts. He's actually first in the league in free throws made. He remains one of the best players in the league in drawing contact and getting to the line, which is what I love about DeRozan. Not only that, but he's still averaging 5.1 rebounds per game and 4.4 assists, as well as 1 steal per game. DeRozan also has one of the highest PERs in the league at 24.2. He's also 6th in the league in offensive win shares and 11th in the league in win shares overall. Now, as for Zach Lavine, who was selected as an all-star last season, he continues to put up insane numbers similar to last year, but unlike last season, his team is winning, which again makes it that much easier to be recognized for your efforts in getting selected. Zach is currently putting up 26.4 points per game, which is just right behind DeRozan for 6th in the league. Like DeMar, also on crazy efficiency, shooting 49.6% from the field, but Zach, like last season, is doing it shooting well from deep, shooting near 41% from 3 on 7.6 attempts per game. He's also averaging 5.2 rebounds and 4.4 assists, and what's been most surprising for Zach is that he's taking care of the ball much better than he has in prior seasons over the course of his career, only turning the ball over 2.7 times per game, which is down from 3.5 last season. So anyway, the point is, these guys, both DeRozan and Lavine, are a lock to be all-stars. Like I said, it would be an outrage and the biggest all-star snubbing in history if either one of them were to be left off the all-star list. Now, the question really lies is in the other two, of Nikola Vucevic and Lonzo Ball, and whether they have enough legitimacy to be all-stars. Now, one of the benefits that Vucevic has is that he's already been an all-star previously, twice actually. And when you've already made an all-star team, it gives you that much more recognition to be selected again, even if your numbers are slightly down. The problem for Vucevic is that even though he's played considerably better in the past couple of weeks, is that his numbers are more than just slightly down because of the slow start that he had this season. Now, the thing is, it's still early. All-star voting is going to be going on for the next 6 weeks or so, and if Vucevic continues to play like he has been, he will have a claim to be selected as an all-star, especially if the Bulls remain at the top of the Eastern Conference. But for now, you compare Vucevic's numbers to last year. He's averaging 15.8 points per game, down from 23.4. He's shooting 42% from the field, down from 47%, 36% from 3, down from 40%, and 10.9 rebounds, which is down from 11.7 last season. Vucevic has improved his defense this season, though, especially with his shot blocking ability, averaging 1.2 blocks per game, which so far is the most in his career, believe it or not, and he's also averaging near a steal per game. So yes, these aren't bad numbers, like I'll take that any day compared to some of the numbers we have seen from Bulls centers in the past, but is it all-star worthy, especially when you consider the drop in numbers from last year? I personally think it's unlikely Vucevic will be selected as an all-star just because the performances and success of Lavine and DeRozan will overshadow it so much, and because he really struggled to start the season. If he's able to maintain the current level of play we have seen so far, at least in the last month or so, then I would say there is a high likelihood that he does make it. But when you compare it to what other big men around the league are doing, well, I guess I should say the Eastern Conference anyway, and what they've been able to do thus far, guys like Joel Embiid, Giannis, Bam Adebayo, even though I know he's injured, Julius Randle, Domantas Sabonis, hell, even Jarrett Allen, especially with the way that the Cavs have been playing lately, I just think it's going to be a tall order for Vucevic to get the All-Star nod. And then finally, Lonzo Ball. I mean, the thing about Lonzo is He has been so valuable to this Bulls team. His defensive ability and what he brings on that end has been a huge part of the Bulls' success this season, even though that defensive effort doesn't always show up in the stat sheet. Unless you're watching and following the Bulls closely, which the common fan, media analyst, or opposing player, again, all guys that actually have a say in the voting and selecting of All-Stars, you're not going to know that. And if you're just looking at his numbers alone, you think, no, this isn't an all-star level player. And of course, it doesn't help when his younger brother is having an incredible season and how much that overshadows Lonzo's performance and his success on this Bulls team. Lonzo is averaging 13.2 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, and 5 assists. He's shooting the three ball well, 42%, which is the best on the Bulls roster. He's also averaging 1.8 steals per game, which is 9th in the entire league. That's also a career best for him, and 1 block per game, also the highest in his career as well. And he's also 14th in the league in defensive box plus minus. What doesn't show up in the stat sheet are the points that Lonzo creates and plays in transition, his ability to move the pace quickly, deflections per game, and opposing players' points per game when Lonzo is guarding them, especially when it comes to the best scorers in the league. Like, all of that stuff isn't recognized as much when thinking about who deserves to be an all-star, which is unfortunate because it should, but that's just how the league works. So because of all of this, I don't see Lonzo Ball getting selected as an all-star. I would actually say his chances are even lower than Vucevic at this point, but I do think that in the near future, Lonzo Ball will find himself in an all-star game, especially if he continues improving in the way that he has over his career. But all that being said, I want to hear from you guys. What do you think, or who do you think will be the all-stars from this Bulls team? What do you think each player's chances are? Let me know in the comments. I'll also have a poll rating some of these for each player in the community tab. And as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.